And finally, the Missouris, the Otos, went on their last buffalo hunt 1874-76. Record's a little clear. They went up on the Platte River to the Wyoming border, and their very last hunt was actually successful. But of course, just within a matter of a year or two, whatever bison were left had been shot out by the hide hunters. So what I'm doing is showing you the world of the Missouria from 1300 to 1881, how well they got around and were involved in a lot of historical events. Here's a little nice piece. This was a letter written by Lieutenant Governor Francisco Cruzat in St. Louis, 1777, that I found in St. Louis. And he writes a short description of the Missouris. And he says, this tribe is composed of 200 warriors. The name of the principal chief of this tribe is Kaigi, and their locations on the very shores of the Missouri River, distant 86 or 87 leagues from this village, meaning St. Louis. Their occupation has always been and is that of the hunt, for although they generally plant a small quantity of maize each year, it is not sufficient even for their own support. This tribe is hostile to all the tribes of the Mississippi, and again, that would be the Sac and the Fox. It says, the work of hunting in which they are occupied is sufficiently profitable for the trade of this post, as is witnessed by the fact they annually produce 80 or 90 packs of furs. The only harm experienced from the people of this tribe is the theft of a few horses from the inhabitants of this district, and the detaining of traders who ascend the river for the sole purpose of getting guns, powder, bullets, and other things from them. The Missouris, being the first tribe that you encountered on the river, they were kind of like the gatekeepers. You had to pay toll, or they weren't going to let you go on upriver. And they had a couple reasons for that. One, they would want to be middlemen for the trade. And, you know, they could get the trade goods, they could mark them up a little bit, trade them to the people west of them. And they weren't too keen on guns going up to people that they were not allied to. So they did like to stop traders, get those guns, get that powder, keep it for themselves. But on the issue of trade, I found that in a lot of St. Louis records, the Missouris were the third leading producer of furs. The biggest fur producer in the whole Louisiana Territory were the big Osages down the on the Osage River. The second leading producer was the Little Osage, their villages were up here with the Missouris, and they're number 3. And of course that meant the fur trade being a big booming business, that meant that the women, they really were the backbone of the trade. The men brought the animals down, but the women were the ones who were butchering everything, dressing those hides and packing them in those bales, which weighed over 100 pounds apiece, and then carting them down to St. Louis to trade. Unfortunately, when you read a lot of history, you don't hear much about the role or involvement of women and children and everything. But again, it's a very male-oriented time in history, you know, both in Europe and here. And so that's what gets recorded, is the men. Whoop. Just really skipping around tonight. These are some trade items that I have on display in Arrow Rock. These are glass beads that were found at the Gunboat Point site, which is just a little bit west of Van Meter. And this is the base of a saucer that was made into a gorget, something they wore around the neck. This is not a necklace. These were loose beads. They were just strung together to kind of keep them together and show some kind of continuity. But here's the thing. The Missouris, like many other Indians, they got trade items. They did not use it the way the Europeans intended to use it. They cut this one down and filed it down to make ornamentation out of it. Other trade items, now these are Little Osage. They're also in the Arrow Rock collection, but the Missouris have the same kind of stuff. The arrowheads that were made out of flint, they pretty much went by the wayside. And because your metal is lighter, sharper, and less prone to break, and you don't have to spend as much time making a point, and it's a lot easier to reuse. So these arrow points are made out of copper and brass. And remember I said they didn't use copper and brass pots? They'd get them in trade, they'd break them up and make arrowheads out of them a lot of times. And then over here we can see the iron axe heads, and of course those replaced axe heads made out of flint. And here's more recycling, 18th century recycling. This is a gun barrel that's been made into a knife handle. Now the knife had pretty well disintegrated away, but that is definitely what it is. Another piece of gun barrel made into a hide scraper to scrape that meat off of buffalo and elk hides. So these people were very much into recycling, very much into adapting European trade goods into their culture, not adapting to European culture at all. This is a mural up at the Van Meter State Park Visitor Center, and it's showing kind of the western edge of the Missouria villages. It may have looked about 1673. Back in the background here, there's an earthwork that's called the Old Fort. We don't know that it was a fort. It may have been a ceremonial area, but it's still there. You can go walk out and see the thing. And the Missouria in 1673 were very populous people. 1804, William Clark, as he's coming by here, and he's starting to write a lot about the Missourians when they used to live here. He says, the Missourians were, quote, once the most numerous nation in this part of the continent, unquote. Another quote, 1693, early French traders in the Illinois country anticipated, quote, the great profits that would derive from the trade with the Missouris as they were a numerous nation, unquote. Another French report from 1698 said, quote, the nation of the Missouris is very considerable and has given its name to the large river that empties itself into the Mississippi, unquote. And then in 1700, French official, Governor Pierre Moyne d'Iberville, made a census of tribes in Louisiana. Now, we know census taking's kind of fraught with folly, whether you're doing people or wildlife, and it was no different then. But the point was, the governor very seriously was trying to determine how many native people he was dealing with, because these people were people to trade with, so they were an economic engine, and also he had to know if they were potential allies or a potential military threat, what kind of forces were they up against. So when he gives these numbers, I think he's trying to get at a real reasonable estimate. And he said in 1700 there were 1,500 families of Missourians. Now, what do we call 1,500 families? Well, we know some Indian families were in one of those single lodges. It has been documented that there were 20 or more people living in their one roof, the extended family. Now, if he meant 1,500 families and a male head of each household, that's 1,500 warriors. Generally speaking, that's about 1/4 or 1/5 of the entire population of the tribe. So depending on how he means, you can end up with a population of Missouri as being somewhere between 5,000 and maybe 12,000 Indians. That's a lot of people. So what happens to them? Here's this huge, huge nation. Everybody says it's important and we're going to make a lot of money off of them. Then in 1702, Father Mark Berger, Jesuit priest in Tamora Mission, Illinois, says in 1702, quote, the Missouris are reduced to nothing, unquote. Well, what we think happened is this. This is a Native American drawing of smallpox. Of course, the Europeans brought smallpox, cholera, influenza with them, and general consensus now is that maybe up to 75% of the native population in North America, well, probably the whole Western Hemisphere, was eradicated by disease. And so this represents a smallpox epidemic hitting in a village. So we have somewhere between 5,000, 12,000 Missouria in the early 18th century. I said 18th, I meant 17th. And by 1780, they're probably down to 800. And by Lewis and Clark's time coming through, there's about fewer than 400. So they've been significantly reduced by that disease and by that continual warfare with the sac and fox that I told you got started in 1712. And even some Oto Missourias that I know, that much knowledge their tribe has retained. They know about that big battle that happened here on the Missouri River with the sac and fox.